Hello, I'm Paul Hammant and I'm here today with Vijay Jambu. Both of us are from ThoughtWorks, and we're going to be presenting what we think is the next evolution in the delivery of rich internet applications. Specifically, the using of Ruby to make a truly rich UI experience. So our starting point for this endeavor was a existing JavaScript and HTML web application. In fact, it's one that's been copied from DeveloperWorks and modernized a little bit. I've deployed it to the Java version of Google's App Engine, and it works quite well, and I'm just going to demonstrate that for a second. It's very Ajaxy. Not using Google accounts. In we go, and it loads some messages, and all of this was done asynchronously from a static HTML page. It uses jQuery to do it, which is a very nice library and simplified the coding, but what we really need to see is what's happening behind the scenes. So the initial request to populate that list view is going to send off a very simple URL for the currently logged in user, and it's going to get back an array, a JSON array of messages, and this is us looking at that. Now, the code that handles this in Java is pretty simple too. There's a POJO, there's a messages method. This mailbox class is extended twice, once into inbox and once into sent, and it returns a array, and the arrays of messages, and the message is a simple JDO object. So beneath the hood, a call is being made into Bigtable, and this is being pulled out, all the fields populated, and there's simple getters and setters for stuff on here. Now, this three-line method here is going to return that array to a servlet, which is going to use a technology Xstream to just turn it into the JSON representation that we saw over here. So that's kind of the crux of the web application. So Vijay, you've been playing with Ruby for a number of years now, and more recently you've tried out Shoes.
Yes.
Can you show us the client you've made for this application?
Okay. So Shoes is a simple GUI toolkit in Ruby, and what I developed with Shoes is a fat client for reading what you saw right now in the Ajax application that Paul demoed with Ruby. Right. This is a sample Shoes client. You can look. It's very DSL-like. If you see, there's a main window with a stack, and stack has like flows and borders and everything, and there's a login window and all the other things. It's very DSL-like, and the idea behind, well, you can have like inbox view and the navigation view for navigation and so on. So it's kind of very declarative in the sense that, as you can see, it uses the concept of flows that are like divs, there's like borders and buttons, very HTML-like.
So this is pretty handy, I think. There's a limitation in the web as we know it, in that most web applications are HTML and JavaScript, and they're two very different languages. HTML is fully declarative. JavaScript is a procedural language, and you're escaping from one language to go into the other to make a larger web application. And in the recent era, we've seen a number of libraries leap into being: Prototype, Dojo, and jQuery, and these are making it a lot easier for people, but it's still a kind of a compromise because you're in two technologies. And maybe this DSL-like idea on a substantial user interface technology can break through the glass ceiling that was represented by HTML and JavaScript. Show us the application.
Right. So what I'm going to do here is to open the application in Shoes, and this is the login screen, which is very similar to the Ajax one that you saw. And I'm going to log in, right? And as you can see, it's like a fat client, and this is the general thing. Notice the inbox count, and let's see. Let me open something. And, well, the inbox count changed. There's some gradient and everything. Shoes give the ability to have rich desktop applications, so you can have gradient and everything, which in JavaScript and HTML world would be very difficult, as you guys know. And this is the sample app, and
well, it's very impressive, but it's reminding me a lot of Lotus Notes.
Yes, it does like Lotus Notes. Well,
at least in look and feel at this stage.
And so the way it works is remember the JSON thing that we saw a few moments earlier in the video. So the Ruby one really looks like this. As you can see, it's a simple hash in Ruby, and the way the Shoes app works right now is that it evals the messages that we get sent and it just displays it over there. And it uses the Ruby hash that we saw on the server directly evaled, and that's what you see in the messages.
So tell me, Vijay, how does Shoes need to improve?
Right. So what Shoes would ideally need, right, is a browser kind of thing, like the one below, like the Safari with a back and forward button. There's like reload, stop, and everything. Now, if it gets that, and if we can load this whole application from URL, it will become really powerful. Now, for this to run in Firefox or something, we would need a native plugin that Firefox could use to build this, and maybe IE and Safari would follow it. And that should make it really powerful.
So let's talk about the second Ruby client for this same application, the same web application. It's a technology called Swiby. Let's launch it. Maybe slightly longer launch than the Shoes one. And a slightly different user experience. In this particular case, this is way more like a desktop application than the other Lotus Notes like Shoes one. And it's much the same in that we can select messages from the individual list and see them presented down here. We can flip between inbox and sent box, and we can draft new messages. Not that they actually go anywhere. The Swiby application was made by a guy in Belgium called Jean Lazarou, and I think it's best described on his blog page. So he's got model view controller going on, some small classes to help do things across the wire, but the view style is where most of this application is described. It's a DSL again, it's nested and declarative, very much like the Shoes one was. It's using different concepts and different terms for the mechanics of web applications, but it's more or less the same idea as Shoes.
So, Paul, tell me, why Ruby?
Well, my first attempt at this idea, DSL-like language instead of HTML and JavaScript, was in 2004 with a technology called Thicky, which was open source, but it's dead as a project now. It used Groovy, and Groovy is just as elegant on the eye as Ruby is, but has the problem that it's compiled before execution, which means there's a delay, and that delay will be on first load and between page transitions. Ruby and JRuby, which is what Swiby uses, are interpreted, which means there's a shorter time between page transitions, and that to me is the secret of success of this idea. Short page transitions and no user angst whilst things are apparently slowly working. So in the end, both of these technologies are promising for the truly rich internet application space of the future.